Morning. Hey, both of you guys. Nice to see you. So we were just chatting before the class about this retreat that I went on, asking whether it was silent retreat or non-silent retreat, and um, it's I've had that question a bunch of times. In fact, it's one of the most common questions that people asked when I mentioned that I was going on a retreat, and it's so clearly in our minds we've built some association between retreat and silent retreat. Those two words are somehow connected, associated, and also retreat certainly means separating from your normal daily work. And
Mhm.
so in our daily lives, our home, for example, I said I was going on a retreat. So clearly I'm leaving my home, I'm going somewhere else, I'm separating from my normal environment, I'm not at work. So in a lot of ways, I'm sort of unplugging from my normal social environment, including, you know, I went alone without my wife and so forth. So like even that, separating from that, um, and the idea of silent retreat, from among all of the questions that folks asked, they asked about the silent retreat because I think our mind is simultaneously kind of attracted to and daunted by the idea of a silent retreat. It depends. If you've never been on a silent retreat before, it's likely to sound daunting. If you've been on a silent retreat, it's probably more likely to sound very attractive, like, oh, I'd love to go back to silent retreat. Now, of course, everybody, your mileage may vary, as we say. Everybody's experience is different, but um, the I've been on both silent retreats and non-silent retreats, and I've never been on a very long silent retreat, but some of my friends have been on 3-month silent retreats, 3 year silent retreats in some cases. So one of the teachers who ran a meditation center in Scotland for a long time, he said he's never actually had difficulty getting people to go into silence. But to get them to come out of silence, he has had to resort to pressure, cajoling, begging, and even threats of physical violence. He was joking, but to get people to come out of silence. So we can talk a little bit about why that is, but there is there is um, meditation generally, right? We think about meditation, we think, okay, you're silent, you're disengaging. So even like a 20-minute meditation, it's a silent retreat. It's a little mini silent retreat. You're not engaging socially with anybody. Your eyes are closed. You're not talking and so forth. And what do we find there? Well, we find hopefully some greater peace. And we know we need something like that because otherwise it's just busy and incessant. It's like all this noise, right? Like being in a, and then when we find even a brief or even somewhat shallow experience of peace and meditation, there's a relief there, right? Now, we also experience relief every single night when we go to sleep. It's like, oh, I'm just going to collapse, right? And our mind, we know our brain just retreats inward. It's just like, oh, I've just had enough of this stuff, right? And so what happens while we're dreaming? Um, our body rests, of course, but the research on dreams and sleep is that it's not really so much about the body, it's about the brain. The brain needs to flush out toxins, and to flush out toxins, the brain actually has to contract. So I don't know if you know this phenomenon where if a runner, your feet actually swell, right? So if you're a runner, you're supposed to get a shoe size like 1 or 2 size bigger because your feet swell. It makes sense, right? All that energy, blood going to the feet, just the motion, but also just keeping the tissue alive and healthy. When you're thinking, that takes glucose in the brain, it takes blood to the brain, it takes oxygen, and so forth. And your brain, it's active, and so there's more blood flowing to the brain, right? And so your brain actually swells a little bit, expands a little bit. And then when you fall asleep, your brain actually shrinks a little bit. But what happens, you have inside your brain, you have some space, and space for what's called cerebrospinal fluid. It surrounds the outside of the brain. It's inside some areas. And that allows you, basically it functions to, well, they didn't know what it did for a long time, I think, but more recently discovered that it functions to sort of wash out and flush out all these metabolic byproducts, right? Metabolic byproducts, like if I am exercising, I'm putting out a lot of CO2, right? Consuming O2, that's a metabolic byproduct, to use a fancy word, right? It's a toxin. If I just were in a plastic bag with only CO2, I'll die very quickly, right? Because I'll consume the oxygen and fill with CO2. And the brain's the same. Unless you flush out the toxins in the brain, the metabolic byproducts, your brain won't function very well. And so sleep deprivation functions like a hallucinogen. You begin to hallucinate in various ways. If you've ever stayed up all night working on a project, I mean, at some point you get this kind of like hallucinations, like I start hearing like some just music in the background. Like I was listening to music and then I turn it off and I'm still hearing the music. And, you kind of get into these, if you're a bit sleep deprived, you can get into these cycles that are almost like dreaming. So I used to be, doing long, deployments and these kinds of things, staying up all night doing deployments. There's a nod to the technical folks in the audience, but at some point you realize you've just been sitting there for 20 minutes and you've not actually done anything, right? But you're just kind of dreaming about something. So that's a hallucination, and your brain's hallucinating because it's got some intoxicants in it from sleep deprivation. So we need this reset from sleep. Meditation allows us to get similar reset, but even a silent retreat, or any retreat really, but certainly a silent retreat, it also provides us a chance to get a reset. There is this sort of historically, there's kind of this macho culture of like stay up all night before your presentations and get that paper finished and do an all-nighter and so forth. And we do need some, I call it a macho culture, but it's a culture of like proving toughness, like proving resilience. And there's a place for that. But it's, I think we know, like the research they've done on doctors and interns who are doing 80, 100-hour work weeks, they make worse decisions, right? So there's a risk to this as well. So what we're doing when we're meditating is we're starting to reprogram our brain, so to speak, or allow our mind to find different patterns of thinking. And retreat would give a longer opportunity for that. Now, we tend to think of ourselves as just isolated individuals, like I'm here, I've got my ideas, I had a great idea, let me tell you about it, and so forth. We think about ourselves as isolated individuals, but the very fact that I can speak to you and you can understand me indicates that we speak a common language. In fact, to a great degree, we've got a common culture. Even our ability to reason, like my ability to remember things, depends on words, right? When I say I went on a retreat, it's a concept. It's not, I don't even really have a clear mental picture of that. It's just, I know conceptually that happened. We use words for our memory, for our reasoning and so forth. And words are fundamentally a social thing, right? And so much of how we think is in fact totally a social phenomenon, including those aspects of interacting with others. We think about how do they see us? How do we see them? Do we like them? Do they like us? What are we going to do together? Are they, what are they doing? There's stories that we're telling ourselves all the time. And when we're interacting with other people, we tend to synchronize our stories, right? So I don't know if that makes sense, but it's like, I'm imagining, Eileen was mentioning about going to a farmer's market, but I'm imagining, two people come, they see a display of produce or something, and one of them is like, oh, I love avocados. And they're like, oh, I love avocados too. And you're sort of synchronizing your perspective, even in these very brief interactions, or sometimes dissenting or whatever, but we're definitely playing off of each other mentally, and we're making connections with others. And so certainly you see it all the time on social media, right? I follow this person, I like this. They make a statement, I like it, or I ignore it, or I unfollow that person. Or we're forming and breaking these social connections all the time in every interaction that we have with others. And it has a phenomenally big impact on our mind and our thinking. It shapes and structures how we think, and how we think, of course, shapes and structures how we respond to situations, including how we see ourselves. And one of the most common dynamics that we have, for example, in the workplace, is trying to be competent and trying to be seen as being competent by the people around us, right? Like, if you're in an environment at work where you've just got hours of meetings and interactions and so forth, we're constantly struggling to figure out what's going on, trying to understand what other people are doing, and trying to respond in such a way that people don't think that we're incompetent. at least for me, that's sort of an implicit goal in every meeting I go to. I don't want these people to think that I'm incompetent, right? So there's like this constant struggle to sort of, in a sense, shape how people see me. Like even now, I'm trying to speak, in such a way that you think I'm not just rambling. Of course, you've got your doubts, you have your suspicions that maybe I'm just rambling, but I'm trying to. I have a wish, right? A continual wish to convince you that I actually have something sensible to say that's worth some of your time on a Saturday. And of course, you're the final judge of that. But so my sense of myself, right, is also tightly bound up with these social interactions, right? There's you there, there's me here. I have this strong sense of separation between me and you, right? You're somewhere living in my computer somewhere, and I'm here, right? This strong sense of a gap, of a distance, right? And also some threat, or some risk that maybe I will come across as being seen as incompetent. So Eileen, you raised a point in the chat, and you're welcome to clarify it verbally or whatever, because I didn't quite capture.
About the all-nighters or about what's the point?
Oh no, asking yourself, what's the point? Yeah. What was your thought?
When we're telling a long story to somebody, and it's like or when you're writing something, trying to understand what is your point, and asking yourself, is it worth writing if you don't know what your point is? And keeping a goal in mind. So that's nice. Kind of what we do. What I know my husband and I do it to each other. Well, what's the point? Get to the point. Understand what your point is, so you've communicated your competence or your ability to clarify, clarity. So it's just a phrase we use a lot, which is why I put in quotes.
Perfect. Perfect. And it's similar. I've mentioned in the past, I think I'm working on another book. And that was one of the feedback that we got early on from the editors and the publishers, that if you really want to do a good job, make sure you have a really clear and concise point for the book and work backwards. Every single chapter needs to have a point. Every section has a point. Every paragraph has a point. And so that caused us to stop writing, because we were just like writing all these great ideas, and then we're like, I think we need to be really, really precise about what is this point or series of connected points that are necessary to bring the reader to a certain conclusion. So ideally, the result of an interaction, so this is quite meta, right? Like talking about this class itself, but the result of an interaction is a changed state of mind for everybody involved, in a sense. Ideally, you've changed from a state of not understanding something to understanding something. That's the idea of education, right? Like you walked into a session, you didn't understand a topic, you walk out, you understand it clearly. Like that's a great result. And in a sense, every time we're communicating, we're educating each other, right? In a sense, we're changing each other's minds. When we have business meetings, we're educating each other on what's the current state of a problem, or we're educating each other on what a possible solution might be, or what's the current state of delivering a solution. And so in a sense, we're constantly educating each other. I feel it's incumbent on me to clarify the point that I'm trying to make here, which is that the interaction between the interplay between the social interactions that we're in and the way we think and how our mind operates, and then specifically, what is the purpose of meditation and what is the purpose of retreat? What is the purpose of disengaging from society, either for 20 minutes or 20 days? What's the point of disengaging socially is the point that I'm trying to make. So the in a sense, communication is educating one another. There's a famous professor of education named Chris Argyris, who I don't know if he originally introduced it, but a lot of his writings focus on what's called single loop learning or double loop learning. So the meaning of that is, so the way that I like to think about the meaning of that is through a framework that I mentioned in the past called an OODA loop, OODA, like observe, orient, decide, act. And we're going through this process all the time. We observe things. We hear people say something, we see something, we observe, but then immediately what we do is we orient ourselves. And what that means is we take that information, we try to put it into a framework so that we understand. Somebody comes to us and they say, oh, I've got a headache. And we're like, okay, headache. I understand headache. And you put it into a framework of like where headaches come from, what they cause. And so you might say, oh, well, we can skip this meeting for now if you want, or were you out drinking last night? Or, whatever is the conclusions that you come to sort of orient yourself towards that. That's a simple example. In a complex scenario, you see I guess in the technical world, like you see a failure notification about something, you've observed some notification, but then you've got to orient yourself to that and see, does this matter? Does it not matter? What's this indicate? Did something go wrong? The equivalent of like a crack in a building. Is it just superficial? Is it significant? That's the orient process. And then based on that, we make a decision, we decide to do something, and then we take an action. And then we're going through the cycle all the time. So we're always observing and orienting. So when Chris Argyris talks about single loop learning, what he means is you learn something, but it doesn't change the framework through which you understand the world. You go shopping and you see a bunch of vegetables there in the produce section, just like they've always been there. And you don't really learn anything. You just learn, oh, these things are on sale and, these look very ripe and there's a new display here. It doesn't fundamentally change how you think about the world. You've just, you've learned, but on a more superficial level. It's called single loop learning. Double loop learning is where not only are you updating the the active current information in your mind, but you're actually changing the structures by which you understand things. So you go to the grocery store, and then all of a sudden they're out of toilet paper, to take an example from a year and a half ago, or some of the things, many supply chains have been disrupted around the world. You go to a car dealership, you want to rent a car, and you don't just learn that the prices are quite high. You learn, in fact, that there's a supply chain issue, and that something has changed about the economy, where there's a shortage of rental cars or supply chain issues. And you begin to think, and you begin to understand the world in a different way. You actually begin to see, well, even this grocery store, this rental car agency is dependent on. So what we're doing with meditation, to bring it back to that, is a kind of double loop learning. We're trying to deeply change how we see ourselves, how we see our world, how we see what is stressful, what is not stressful, what are other people like, what they're not like, and so forth. And to do this, we need to change our mind deeply. But engaging with the world around us, we tend to just reinforce existing patterns, right? You go into your same office and you got the same feeling. And before I went on retreat, I was having this feeling like, oh, I just don't want to see my computers anymore. It's just like, I've been sitting here for years, and I just needed, maybe I just rearrange my desk or something. I just got to break it up, make some change. So your environment, the people around you, the things you do, they keep you locked in the same patterns, right? So you need a way of disengaging, whether it's 20 minutes or 20 days or 20 months or whatever, some way of disengaging if you want to change your mind. That's what going to university, like if you go back and get an MBA, or you go back to school, that's what that's for. It's like put people in a little incubator for a period of time, give them a chance to learn. Meditation does this, but it's particularly challenging our ideas about ourselves and our ideas about others on a deep level. And our mind, like when we go into sleep, your mind resets, your mind reboots, but it doesn't, when you wake up, you sometimes have the same exact patterns, the same scenarios arise. Like everybody wants too much, wants more from me than I'm able to offer. That happened yesterday. I was exhausted. I fell asleep. I woke up, same situation today, right? So you see the same patterns. But sometimes we wake up and we're just in a good mood, right? It's just a great day. We just know it's going to be a great day. Sometimes we wake up, we're in a terrible mood, right? We can see how our mind can change just naturally, unpredictably. With meditation, what we're doing is we're trying to intentionally change our mind, sculpt, nudge our mind in more useful directions. So if you're not engaging with society, if you're silent, and so what are you engaging with? Two main categories of things. Teachings that help point out objects of meditation, ways of changing our mind, and so forth, or our own mind and body itself. So initially, you mainly, to learn meditation and so forth, you mainly need to engage with a teacher or books or something that will explain these concepts for you, so you understand them and you can be guided in and so forth. But gradually, your interactions become more and more with the inner teacher of your own body and your own mind. Like, what can I learn from my own mind? So as you're disengaging socially, what you're beginning to see is you're beginning to observe your body, what your body is actually doing, and what your mind's actually doing. On a short-term scale, you engage with your body, you notice things like, oh, my butt hurts, my shoulders are stiff, I feel a little bit of tension here, or, oh, this feels very relaxing to settle in. You're beginning to observe these things in the body. But then on a mental level, you're beginning to observe, distractions, and thinking about this and thinking about this, mind wandering, or just feeling a little bit bored or depressed, or feeling joyful or whatever. There's all these waves and movements that are happening in the mind. But these waves and movements, I guess the final point I'll make before we actually do some meditation practice, the final point that I'll make, these waves and movements of memories and distractions and so forth, they're very, very much tied to the things that we've been engaging with, recently. So if we just had a conversation with somebody, we settle into meditation, the conversation is going to be on our mind. Right? You saw something on TV last night, you sit down to meditate, it comes back into your mind. This same retreat meditation teacher in Scotland, who I mentioned earlier, who used to guide people on months and years-long retreats over the course of decades, he said, if you like movies, you're going to love Silent Retreat, because you get to replay every movie you've ever seen in your entire life while you're on a long silent retreat. Because all this stuff just comes flooding back. There's this endless stream of dreamlike distractions. That's not, that's in between bursts of sublime peace and silence, of course, but it's just indicating that is that we're profoundly influenced by the environment that we're around, the people around. The idea that we're independent individuals is complete fabrication, right? Like we're members of a society, we're participating, and we're shaped deeply by that. But what we need to do is to begin to gain more control over our own mind, and begin to gain more control over our own mind, especially, as I've said in the past, it often starts with discipline, just building some mental strength, including like the discipline of coming to meditation classes. I've been running these classes for almost a year now. And so you guys have been, a number of folks have been very strong, regular cadence, basically every week. And that's not meditation, but that's discipline. But discipline is the necessary foundation of meditation, because even if we're in like this meditation period, then what we're trying to develop is concentration. But there's a discipline to that, right? Like you've got to say, okay, concentrate, bring your attention back. And that's the discipline aspect. It's a foundation for concentration. It's only if you've got that discipline, then you can begin to really get into the zone. So what we can do is in this final time that we have left for some meditation, we can begin to observe our own body and mind, but we can recognize that what's happening in our mind is socially conditioned to a great degree. It's because of it's really a reflection of society, the society that we're in and so forth. And one reason I like that is because it shows this, if you really want to still your mind, in a sense, it's like you're stilling society. It's like you're wrestling with the bowl. Wrestling with the bowl of your own mind is like wrestling with the bowl of society. If you can shape your own mind like you can shape cultures. So anyway, some power there. So, okay. So why don't we settle in for some meditation? We just find as comfortable a position as we can. We can close our eyes to help to reduce distractions, and you can imagine yourself in a peaceful and beautiful environment. And you can imagine around you your parents, your friends, family, co-workers, those you interact with. But instead of thinking of them as we normally do, where they're pulling on our state of mind in countless ways, we feel now all of these people have become peaceful, happy. They're engaging in meditation alongside of us, and they're delighted. And they're super happy to be enjoying some meditation alongside of us. So we actually imagine those around us in such a peaceful state to indicate how we understand how much our mind is influenced by society, and how finding a peaceful, wise, kind state of mind is like wrestling the bull of our own mind, but it's almost like wrestling all of society, helping the whole world just settle down, find peace, find wisdom, find joy, find a kind heart. We can just hold this view of ourself surrounded by our parents, friends, family, colleagues, imagining them all peaceful, happy, and delighted to be engaging in meditation along with us. If our mind's distracted, we recall imagining we're sitting in a peaceful and beautiful environment, surrounded by our parents, friends, family, colleagues. We're all peaceful, smiling, joyful, and delighted to be engaging in meditation alongside us. if we can't even imagine others as peaceful, joyful, with a good intention, meditating alongside of us, these people exist only in our imagination right now. Right now, we're just imagining these people. And if we can't even bring these imagined people into an imagined state of peace, joy, happiness, kindness, virtue, our imagined versions of the world will continue to drag us and draw us into our own stressful patterns of thinking, our own reactive, agitated, unhelpful patterns of thinking. This is our mind. We deserve profound control over our own mind. We deserve to be able to bring our mind to a peaceful, happy state. To do that, we have to at least be able to get the imagined versions of our friends, co-workers, and so forth to be able to fulfill their wishes, to be able to find the happiness they seek, the peace they seek. If we're going to find the happiness and peace that we seek. Then we can gradually begin to bring our meditation to a close by making a decision that even when we're outside of meditation, to be mindful of the influence that people around us are having on us, and to not allow ourselves to be influenced by the mental attitudes of others that draw us away from our own peace and wisdom. Strength, we make a decision to build this strength, to not allow our own mind of peace, wisdom, and kindness to be disturbed or damaged by being influenced by others. And then we can open our eyes and rise from our meditation.